Well, good morning, everyone. We're going to try and trace Israel's journey from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai this morning. You might want to close those doors. There we go. So I want to begin with a quick look back to Exodus 12 before saying some things about 13, and then I want to focus on 14, which is the actual description of the Exodus. So in chapter 12, as we saw, right, we have instructions for the Passover, and there's some important things that are said to Moses that we just want to take a brief glance back toward. So thing number one is this. In Exodus 12:11, we get the instructions for how the people of Israel are supposed to leave Egypt as they're celebrating the Passover, and this is part of them. In this manner you shall eat it with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. That's a wonderful interpretation of the 10 plagues that are sent upon Egypt. That is, as I mentioned last time, each plague actually is directed against one particular Egyptian god, or maybe two or three. It was hard to count because there were so many of them. But anyway, the idea here is that the plagues are not simply random punishments, but they're examples of God exercising judgment on all the gods of Egypt. And the purpose of this, right, is this shows that God is the Lord, the one true God, the Creator. Okay, so the plagues are really, really important in terms of God revealing himself to human beings, not only to Egypt, but also to the people of Israel as well. The second backward glance to chapter 12 that I just want to mention before moving on is something that is found in Exodus 12:35. So this is the people of Israel are getting ready to leave. They're heading toward the Red Sea. Pharaoh has just relented and has decided to let them go. We'll see in a minute that he changed his mind, but here's what happens. The people of Israel had also done as Moses told them, for they'd asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so they let them have what they asked. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. So really important point here. So notice the people of Israel don't simply leave with the people of Egypt saying, "Yeah, get the heck out of here, go. Y'all are trouble." And kind of picketing with signs, "Go home, Israel, get out," things like that. Actually, notice what happens is another sign of divine activity is the people of Israel actually leave Egypt with favor with the people of Egypt. The people of Israel actually leave Egypt with the favor of the people of Egypt, so much so that as they're going, the people of Egypt are giving them like expensive clothes, kind of like Chanel jackets and Armani scarves and gold and silver and a bunch of other stuff. And so they leave with all this wealth. As we'll see in a minute, well, not in a minute, but in a while, when we get to later on in the book of Exodus, we'll see that all this valuable stuff is really important because it'll be used in the creation of the tabernacle. Okay, so this is not just wealth for the people of Israel to take. This is going to be raw material for Israel's worship, and I'll spend some time talking about that in a couple weeks. So the two back glances to chapter 12. Now I want to take a look at chapter 13. Chapter 13 is sort of like the warm-up to the Exodus itself. And two things occur here that we just want to note. Once again, on their way out, it's seemingly a small incident, but it's very important. And it occurs in Exodus 13:19. Moses took the bones of Joseph with him, for Joseph had made the sons of Israel solemnly swear, saying, God will surely visit you, and you shall carry up my bones with me from here. So notice what happens here. As I said, this may sound, like small, but it's really significant. The last thing that Moses does before the people of Israel actually leave Egypt is he finds the bones of Joseph, Abraham's great-great-grandson, gets them. And the last thing they do is they carry Joseph's bones out of Egypt. And that's really like the sign that, okay, we are out of here. We're gone. This episode in our history is done, closed. We're taking Joseph's bones with us. Goodbye. Okay, we are out. So long. So this gives like finality to the Exodus. Okay? That is, the Exodus here isn't just like a kind of a thing, well, let's all get together and feel like we've been freed from Egypt. This is real. This is a real departure, and I'll come back to that point in a minute because it's really important. So let's take a look at chapter 14 now. Chapter 14 is actually the description of the Exodus event itself. My temptation would be to read the whole thing because it's so dramatic. We don't have time to do that, but I'll just want to call your attention to a couple points. But I do want to say this before we look at chapter 14. It's really important that we not think that chapter 14 is the centerpiece of the book of Exodus. Those of you who have watched the movie with Charlton Heston, where Charlton Heston does a really good job of portraying Moses, if you've seen that movie, you'll tend to think, okay, this is like the moment in the book of Exodus. It's actually not. The key moment in the book of Exodus actually doesn't occur till the very, very end in Exodus 40. And we'll just save that. This is a preview of coming attractions. Okay? We'll see that's the culmination, but a couple things about what happens in Exodus 14. So here's what happens. We're going to pick the story up in 14:10. So the people of Israel are right up now against the Red Sea. The Egyptians have suddenly realized that their free labor is about to escape. And so Pharaoh sends his army in pursuit of the people of Israel to bring them back. And here's part of what happens. Then Pharaoh drew near. The people of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians were marching after them. And they feared greatly. So here we have this band of escaped slaves. They've run up against this body of water. They turn around, and the world's most powerful army is advancing on them. Okay, so there's genuine cause here for some concern. As the British would say, the people of Israel are in a spot of bother. Okay? And here's the rest of what happens. And the people of Israel cried out to the Lord. They said to Moses, "Is it because there were no graves in Egypt that you have taken us away to die in the wilderness? What have you done to us in bringing us out of Egypt? Is this not what we said to you in Egypt? Leave us alone, that we may serve the Egyptians. For it would have been better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the wilderness." So this is a really interesting thing. Once again, it seems kind of small, but I think it's important to point out. This story, the story of the Exodus, right, is being told by the people of Israel. But notice here, it helps us to avoid something. That is, the story does not portray the people of Israel as being heroic in any way, shape, or form. Okay? It's not like, the people of Israel are sort of like right up against the Red Sea, and they're all saying, "Lead us on, Moses. Let us escape from the empire of Egypt. We are a fearless and determined people. We are fighting on. Go, Israel." Instead, the minute they see the Egyptian army, they all turn to Moses and say, "What have you done to us? You got us into this mess. It's all your fault. We told you this wouldn't work out. We were happy serving Pharaoh. We really enjoyed working for him. He was a great guy to work for. Think of the retirement plan that we're missing. Moses, this is all your fault." So notice what we're seeing here is really important, a really important message, right? This takes us all the way back to the Garden of Eden. One of the characteristics of sin is that we always want to find somebody else to blame for our problems, right? We don't know how we got here. We were just innocent bystanders, and Moses over here made a series of really bad decisions, and now we're in this calamity, and we don't know how to get out. So that we see this here, but we just the point, right? Total lack of heroism. And that helps us to see the really important point, right? If these people are going to get out of Egypt, God's going to have to deliver them. That's the only way, right? Because these people actually now are talking about going back. Okay? I mean, I think this is a really important point. So, fear, lack of trust, blame, ingratitude, it's all here. And the story continues. Notice what Moses says to them. And I think we need to think of Moses saying this in a pretty calm voice here in Exodus 14:13. And Moses said to the people, "Fear not. Stand firm and see the salvation of the Lord." Right? Notice what Moses is doing. He's redirecting their attention from their fear, their self-absorption, their anxiety, to saying, "Fear not, stand firm, and if you do that, you'll see the salvation of the Lord because he is going to deliver you." That's a really important thing. It's actually, and I think we'll be exploring this as we move on into the book of Leviticus and Numbers. It's also an essential dimension of any kind of genuine spiritual leadership, right? One of the purposes of any genuine spiritual leadership, right, is to help us move away from our panic, our anxieties, our fears, and kind of refocusing us on what God is doing and will do. Okay? Because, right, if Moses panics as well, right, what good's that going to do? If Moses turns around and says, "You're right, the Egyptian army is advancing on us. Ah!" That's not going to help anybody. And then Moses says something really important in 14:14. And this might be like the most important verse in the whole of the chapter. "The Lord will fight for you, and you only have to be silent." The Lord is going to fight this battle for you, and all you people have to do is shut up and watch. Okay? I mean, I think that's really important. The idea right here of this being a battle that God's going to fight is really significant, and we'll see how that plays itself out as well. Now, to continue the story, and once again, I'm greatly attenuating chapter 14. In 14:15, we find this. "The Lord said to Moses, 'Why do you cry out to me? Tell the people of Israel to go forward. Lift up your staff and stretch out your hand over the sea and divide it, that the people of Israel may go through the sea on dry ground. And I will harden the hearts of the Egyptians so that they will go after them, and I will get glory over Pharaoh and all his hosts and his chariots and his horsemen. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord when I have gotten glory over Pharaoh, his chariots, and his horsemen.'" Notice what God's saying here. Look, I'm the creator. And the most powerful army in the world is nothing to me. If I want to stop the most powerful army in the world, I can do it. Just watch. Okay? Have a little faith and watch. And I'm going to get glory over Pharaoh, his army, his chariots, and the whole 9 yards. And here's pretty much the rest of the story. Then Moses, this is Exodus 14:21. Then Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord drove back by a strong east wind all night and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the people of Israel went into the midst of the sea on dry ground, and the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. The Egyptians pursued and went in after them into the midst of the sea, all Pharaoh's horses, his chariots, and his horsemen. And in the morning, at the morning watch, the Lord in the pillar of fire and of cloud looked down on the Egyptian forces and threw the Egyptian forces into a panic, clogging their chariot wheels so that they drove heavily. And the Egyptians said, "Let us flee from before Israel, for the Lord fights for them against the Egyptians." Really important verse. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Stretch out your hand over the sea, that the water may come back upon the Egyptians and upon their chariots and upon their horsemen." So Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the sea returned to its normal course. When the morning appeared, and as the Egyptians fled into it, the Lord threw the Egyptians into the midst of the sea. The waters returned and covered the chariots and the horsemen on all the host of Pharaoh that had followed them into the sea. Not one of them remained. But the people of Israel walked on dry ground through the sea, the waters being a wall to them on their right hand and on their left. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. And Israel saw the Egyptians dead on the seashore. Israel saw the great power of the Lord against the Egyptians. So the people feared the Lord, and they believed in the Lord and his servant Moses. So here's this dramatic scene, right? Where the waters part, the people of Israel cross, the Egyptian army goes in after them, the waters come back, the Egyptian army basically is drowned, and on the other side, the people of Israel watch the bodies of the Egyptian army kind of washing ashore, and this brings them to an important, but unfortunately temporary moment of belief and trust. It often works that way, right? Moments of belief and trust tend to be kind of temporary and fleeting, as we'll see in just a minute. But here's the really important theological point before we go on to 15, which we'll touch on briefly. This one little sentence here I think is really important. Thus the Lord saved Israel that day from the hand of the Egyptians. So one of the things we're going to see as we make our way through the Old Testament and then we make our way into the New, from this point on, the Bible is going to think of salvation as sort of like the great and final Exodus. Okay, there was the Exodus from Egypt, and now once we get in the New Testament, increasingly we'll see signs in the Old, but once we get in the New Testament, we'll see that salvation is thought of as the great and final Exodus. This time it's the Exodus of creation from sin and death. Okay, so we just want to keep this image in our minds about what salvation is. And also notice this, once again, a hint of things to come. Notice what's just happened here. It's not just that the people of Israel have moved from one place to another. It's not just simply they've been released from slavery and are now free. But there's something else really important that's now taken place, and it's this. The people of Israel have been freed from having to serve Pharaoh to being able to serve God. And that's a wonderful description of what salvation is, right? Salvation is being freed from having to live under sin to being free to serve God. So once again, the Exodus provides a wonderful model for thinking about what salvation is. Now I want to read to you just a couple verses of Exodus 15. The first, I think what is 19? Yeah, first 18 verses of Exodus 15 are called the Song of Moses. It's written in the form of a poem, and the Song of Moses becomes one of the canticles that you'll find. If you do the daily office, you'll find that this is one of the canticles that you can use as part of morning or evening prayer. Let me read you the first couple verses, and I want to say just one or two things about it. So this is Moses now. He's witnessed the Exodus, and now this is sort of almost sort of like an opera. So think of Moses here. The part of Moses is being sung by Luciano Pavarotti. He's now going to sing this wonderful sort of song. I'm not going to try and sing it because I can't sing. Were I to sing, I would simply intensify your experience of Lent. But here's part of what Moses says. Then Moses and the people of Israel sang this song to the Lord, saying, and think of this as a song. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and his rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him, my father's God, and I will exalt him. The Lord is a man of war. The Lord is his name. Now, you won't be surprised to note, and those of you who do the daily office will already know this, is this canticle, the Song of Moses, is appointed to be used during a particular season, the church year. And it may not surprise you to learn that that season, the church year, is Easter, right? Because the Song of Moses is celebrating the great victory of God. Easter, of course, celebrates God's great and final victory, right? With Jesus' death and resurrection. So we want to kind of see a continuity between those two things. I will sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously. The horse and the rider he has thrown into the sea. The Lord is my strength and my song. He has become my salvation. This is my God, and I will praise him. Okay? Now, a couple incidents occur on the way to Mount Sinai, and we'll take a look at two of them. The first thing we want to take a look at is an event that occurs in Exodus 16. This is the story of the manna in the wilderness. There's a whole bunch of important aspects to this scene, but once again, we'll see the people of Israel. That wonderful moment of faith and trust doesn't last long because the minute they kind of get in the wilderness, the following thing happens in Exodus 16:1. They set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the people of Israel came to the wilderness of Sin, or Zin, depending on how you want to translate it, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after they had departed from the land of Egypt. And here it is. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. And the people of Israel said to them, would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, where we sat by the meat pots and ate bread to the full. You have brought us out into the wilderness to kill this assembly with hunger. So once again, right, it's like they jump on Moses, and they all say, okay, whose idea was this? Moses, okay? You're the one who thought this up. You have brought us out into the wilderness, right, where there's not a McDonald's in sight. You brought us out here so that we could all, die of starvation. You are a wicked and evil man, blah, 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 blah. I like this word. The ESV uses it in 16:2. And the whole congregation of the people of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron. We can, imagine the people of Israel gathering by some sort of Sinai water cooler, kind of going on and on and on about all the things they don't like. So once again, we see them ungrateful, unmindful of what's been done for them, worried about themselves, and kind of being very, very concerned about their own immediate needs. And by the way, this will be a theme that'll run basically from now and all the way through the book of Numbers. That one of the things that happens to the people of Israel as they're walking through the wilderness is their journey through the wilderness is sort of like a spiritual discipline, right? And part of the spiritual discipline is, do the people of Israel sort of have the wherewithal to focus away from their own immediate anxieties and wants and focus on God's like larger purpose, okay? And again, they kind of fall back into immediate wants, immediate needs, immediate fears, and it always leads to trouble, okay? So this is something that they have to learn. God, however, listens to the people. He realizes that they need to eat, and so this is what happens. In the evening, quail came up. This is Exodus 16:13. In the evening, quail came up and covered the camp, and in the morning, dew lay around the camp. And when the dew had gone up, there was on the face of the wilderness a fine, flake-like thing, fine as frost on the ground. And then when the people of Israel saw it, they said to one another, "What is it?" It's like they're like really suspicious. For they did not know what it was, and Moses said to them, "It is the bread that the Lord your God has given you to eat." And then later on in 16:31, it's identified as manna. Important little thing to note. When the people of Israel say, "What is it?" Actually, that's the Hebrew word manna. What is it? Okay, they're not really sure what this is. And obviously, right, they're not all that grateful for it either. But an important point, and I think we want to kind of take this very seriously. In 1635, we're reminded of something that's really important, and it's this. The people of Israel ate manna 40 years till they came to habitable land. They ate the manna till they came to the border of the land of Canaan. So, notice what's going on here. As they're out in the wilderness, on their way to Mount Sinai, we're told here that the people of Israel are sustained by the manna for 40 years during their journey from the Red Sea to the land of Canaan. We don't have time to do this right now, but if you want to take a look at this, if you read Joshua 5, you'll find something really important. When the people of Israel are about to cross the Jordan River for the first time to enter the land of Canaan, two important things happen. First of all, the water of the Jordan parts, just like the Red Sea, and the people enter. And the second thing is, once they cross the Jordan River, and once they're able to begin eating the produce of the land, guess what happens? The manna stops. So really important point here, right? Notice what happens here. This journey from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai all the way to the Promised Land. Once the people of Israel cross over in the Promised Land, God reminds them of something that's really important. God says, "Look, I sustained you through your whole journey. I not only freed you from Egypt, made a covenant with you on Mount Sinai, I'm the one who brought you to the Promised Land that I promised to give to Abraham and to his descendants." Promise made, promise kept. Promise made, promise kept. Okay, God's constantly reminding the people, right? I make promises, I keep them. I make promises, I keep them. It's really important because they keep forgetting them. Second thing that happens on the way to Mount Sinai, and this is maybe the last thing we're able to do, another incident. This is from Exodus 17, and if you were waiting for the complaints of the people of Israel to stop, I'm sorry. They're going to go on for quite a while. The only question is not whether they're going to complain, but what they're going to complain about. Okay, so in 17:1, we find another issue, and here it is. All the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of Sin by the stages, according to the commandment of the Lord, and camped at Rephidim. But there was no water for the people to drink. Uh-oh, you see it coming, right? Therefore, the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." Once again, right, this is your fault, Moses. You know, the fact that we're about to die of thirst, it's on you, right? It's your decision. We're innocent bystanders. And Moses said to them, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses and said, "Why did you bring us out of the land of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with these people?" I'd be about there, wouldn't you? You know, you have this picture right in your mind of Moses about, just about to submit his letter of resignation, right? Okay, I resign as leader of the people of Israel. Goodbye. I'm out of here. So long. But God intervenes, and this happens. And the Lord said to Moses, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there in the rock at Horeb," which is another name for Mount Sinai, "and you will strike the rock, and water will come out of it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord, saying, Is the Lord among us or not? So they get their water from Moses striking the rock, and the water gushes out. But notice, really important here, that the place is given two alternative names, Massah and Meribah. Massah because the people of Israel grumbled and complained, and Meribah because this is where they tested the Lord. Now I want to fast forward just a minute since our time is almost over. This testing of Israel in the wilderness needs to be kind of put in a larger context, and I'll do that next time, but I want to make one contextual remark here. This is the context in which we need to read the temptation stories in the Gospels. Remember where Jesus goes out in the wilderness for 40 days, and he's tempted in the wilderness, right? He fasts for 40 days, and then the tempter comes and tempts him. And remember what one of the temptations is. "Oh, Jesus, do you see all these rocks out here in the wilderness? It would be a really, really impressive thing if you could turn like these rocks into loaves of bread. Think of the following you'd have. I mean, think of the headlines in tomorrow's New York Times. Galilean turns rocks into bread. Think of your poll numbers. Think of your Facebook page. Think of what they'll be saying about you on Twitter." That's the temptation, right? Remember what Jesus says in response to the temptation, right? He quotes from the book of Deuteronomy and says, right, "Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God." And by the way, in Matthew's account, every response Jesus makes to the temptation is a quotation from the book of Deuteronomy. We'll take a look at some of that later. The important point is this. In some way, shape, or form, Jesus is sort of reliving this portion of the life of Israel, only it's turning out in a very different way, right? As one person put it, the Israelites learn a particular approach to temptation, right? Their strategy for dealing with temptation is to yield to it. Okay? Their strategy for dealing with temptation is say, "Oh yes, I want water. Oh yes, we want bread." Notice what happens in Jesus. We get a very different story. No, 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 and then Jesus says to the devil, quite literally, "Get the hell out of here." That is what we're seeing right here is Jesus is sort of like stepping into our place and resisting on our behalf all the temptations that are placed before him. And in doing that, he's revealing something about himself. He's revealing himself to be the true Israel. He and he alone is the true people of God. We'll learn more about this as we move on. But we'll pick things up next Sunday at Exodus 19. That'll get us at the foot of Mount Sinai, and we'll do a little warm-up to the Torah or law that follows.